so we see that the Colombian government has been fairly progressive in terms of indigenous people. Now let's look at the cities. We're going to take a look at Medellin today. Medellin is a very influential city. It's not the capital, but it's a very large city. And it's a city that you're going to see in your documentary this week was very much embroiled in violence in the 1970s and 80s and even the early 90s. And that's because the Medellin drug cartel was at war not only with other drug cartels to traffic cocaine into the United States and into Europe, but they were also at war with the government, the police, the judges, all of the institutions of Colombia. It was the murder capital of the world in the 1980s. And today it's one of the most progressive cities in all of Latin America and even the world. What Medellin has done is it's increased the mobility of its poorest sectors by creating infrastructure. They have created an efficient metro and cable car system that allows people to access the city easily. It has worked on civic spaces. It has provided poor neighborhoods with escalators that are in hillside areas where people can not easily walk from place to place. And it's also created cable cars that allow the poor to access the city. Now, the idea here is that the very poor neighborhoods tend to be in hillsides, just like the favelas in Brazil that we'll study in a few weeks. And these areas are very dangerous. And so what the Colombian government has done is that they've created these cable cars that will allow people to commute from these poor areas into the city to work and then come back at night in a safe and easy way. The cable cars are not expensive, and they allow people access that didn't have it before. Comuna 13 is one of the poorest neighborhoods in Medellin, and this is the setting of 6 escalators that ascend 1,200 feet into the neighborhood. This shortens the walk from half an hour to 5 minutes, and it also gives handicapped people who wouldn't necessarily be able to go from place to place, access. And what it also does is integrates this neighborhood into the rest of Medellin. The idea again here is that poor neighborhoods in Latin America, and you could argue in the US as well, don't have access to cities, and so they are trying to create ways that people can move back and forth unhindered and safe and work and bring money back into their communities. So it's very progressive. The Urban Land Institute has recognized Medellin as a progressive city, and it named it the world's most innovative city in 2013. Now, this was a worldwide search of more than 200 cities, and they narrowed it down to the point where they chose Medellin. The Institute for Transportation and Development Policy awarded Medellin with the Sustainable Transportation Award. That's partly because Medellin has created an underground metro. The underground metro helps solve solutions both socially and environmentally. It eases pollution, it cuts transportation times, and it cuts urban crowding as well. Medellin also has a very interesting public and private connection, and that is to say that transportation and other infrastructure projects have been financed by an alliance of public and private interests. So you can make the argument that you need private money, obviously, to build, but you don't necessarily want only private money because it might not take into account the best thing for the public. So what Medellin has done is it's created projects where you have a public-private conversation about what the greatest good of the city is. And then you have what's called participatory budgeting, and that's where residents define and allocate funds to projects they consider important for the city. So they sit down in a committee, and they're essentially able to argue what they would like, create a common vision, and then see forth that vision. In addition to that, Colombia has created civic projects. They've allowed outdoor artwork to be commissioned. They've created a lot more museums, cultural centers, parks. I didn't put it here, but they've created a lot of libraries. What they're seeking is civic engagement, in particular amongst the poorer residents in Medellin. This is an example of outdoor art. Fernando Botero is an artist who paints and sculpts large people, and he is a world-famous artist. He's the most famous artist in Colombia and perhaps right now the most famous living artist in all of Latin America. And they've commissioned him to create these sculptures that are outdoor in the public and for free. This is a picture of the cable car system that I discussed earlier. And again, these cable cars take people back and forth between poor, isolated neighborhoods in the hillsides, what are called favelas in Brazil or slums in Colombia, and they allow people to move from place to place easily and quickly. And this is a picture of the escalator system that I talked about earlier. You can see how steep this neighborhood is, and you can see the need for this. Lastly, I want to talk about conflict in Colombia. The FARC, F-A-R-C, evolved out of the execution of Gaitan in 1948. Now, you remember Gaitan because we talked about him in our lecture about Fidel Castro. And you'll remember that Castro was on his way to meet Gaitan in Bogota the day that Gaitan was assassinated. And you'll also remember that Gaitan was a progressive, visionary leader who wanted to change Colombia and address income inequality. After his assassination, Colombia experienced a horrific 10 years of violence, which left 200,000 people dead, and it was in the context of this that revolutionary groups emerged. One of them was the FARC. Now, the FARC is a group that has claimed to have revolutionary ambitions and has claimed to represent the peasants and the countryside and has claimed to want to address income inequality in Colombia. However, the FARC is a controversial group. They have been involved heavily in drug trafficking. They have conscripted minors, which means that they have forced young people to fight with them. They have been involved with terrorism and extrajudicial killings and kidnappings as well. Many rich and influential Colombians, including politicians, have been kidnapped at one point or another by the FARC. And even today, when you go to Bogota and you pull into a mall, you will drive through a security checkpoint where the police will have dogs sniff your car and they're looking for bombs. So their resorting to drug trafficking and terrorism has left them unpopular amongst many people who live in urban areas in Colombia, and their support really comes from rural areas, especially Amazonian areas and the southeastern portion of the country. Now, the Colombian military has been fighting the FARC for many years, and at many points this battle has become very ugly. There's a third aspect to this fight, which is that the paramilitary is involved. The paramilitary is not employed directly by the Colombian government. The paramilitary acts upon its own. It's basically a paid mercenary group. But there have been many accusations that the paramilitary and the Colombian government have ties. And what's troubling about the paramilitary is that, yes, you have the FARC fighting the military, and the military has rules and constitutional laws that it has to abide by in that fight. But the paramilitary lies just outside of those parameters, and the paramilitary can go into communities where they suspect FARC to be, and they can do much more violent actions, and sometimes to very bad effect. The paramilitary has been accused of all kinds of human rights violations. So there's this kind of nebulous group that lies outside of the parameters of the fight between the military and the FARC. Unfortunately, many indigenous people have become involved in this battle as innocent bystanders. In this picture taken by Stephen Ferry for National Geographic magazine, you can see the Kogi people who live in northern Colombia witnessing the murder of someone nearby their community. And in this picture, you can see the same group of people, the Kogi, in the mountains in northern Colombia watching a military helicopter come into their territory in search of the FARC. In the past 3 years, the FARC and the Colombian government have been attempting to broker a peace deal. And this is an ongoing effort. The picture that you see here is Raul Castro meeting with Colombian leadership and FARC leadership recently in Havana and attempting to find some solution to the violence. Colombia has improved a lot economically, and there seems to be a lot of upward mobility in the country amongst some sectors. And so the average person, it seems, if you walk around Bogota or Medellin or someplace like that and you talk to them, does not support the FARC. And everybody wants some form of peace or another. The question is, do you give immunity to people that were inside of the FARC who committed terrorism or kidnapping? And there are some other lingering questions as well. And right now, as I record this lecture, the peace talks have been postponed. So we'll see what happens with that in the future. I have a few pictures to show you from the country. This is from the Gold Museum in Bogota. It's a several-story museum that is filled with gold artifacts and artwork that was done by pre-Columbian indigenous people in Colombia, and it's pretty incredible to see in person. The pictures don't really do it justice. This is a full-sized gold mask. San Agustin is an archaeological park filled with several hundred statues that were carved before the arrival of the Spanish. We don't know a lot about who carved them, because by the time the Spanish had arrived, this civilization had vanished or moved on. But we do believe that these statues represent some of the very earliest forms of representations of people chewing coca. That bulge that you can see on both sides of the cheeks is very much consistent with coca use. Archaeologists also believe that these people may have been under the influence of ayahuasca and/or other hallucinogenic properties. This is a street food stand in the Candelaria neighborhood in Bogota selling obleas. And this is a picture headed into southern Colombia. And this is a FARC checkpoint. So when you're on a bus and you head into southern Colombia, all the men are forced to get off the bus in different parts. And they will frisk you, search your stuff. This is the Colombian military doing this. And I'm next in line after this guy who's being searched. And what they do is they pull all of your IDs and they enter that information into a computer system in which they catalog the names of all people going in and outside of what they consider to be FARC territory into a small laptop. And so basically they're watching who's coming and going. And then if there's a terrorist attack, they have the numbers and names of all males that have entered that region within the last month or so. This is a very upscale neighborhood in Bogota, and there is a sense that there's an upward mobility that is growing in Bogota, and there's definitely an oligarchic rich community. There always has been in Colombia, but there is increasingly shopping malls and boutique shopping areas, and it seems as though many people in Colombia are striving for what they see as sort of the good life. Here's another image of that. This is a Botero sculpture that is in the middle of Bogota, and as I mentioned, Bogota has a lot of public art. This is a art center that's dedicated to Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the famous Colombian author. And this is a poor neighborhood in the Candelaria. And I want to close our lecture on Colombia and say that while things are improving there, things are still not perfect. And this neighborhood is only 5 to 10 miles away from the neighborhood that I just showed you with the boutique shopping and the malls and that kind of thing. There's still a big class divide within the country. And that is reminiscent of Latin America, and that there always seems to be this very large gap in income between the rich and poor there. And you can feel this kind of tension even within the city of Bogota. This concludes our lecture today. I'll now point you to Beachboard and we will continue our discussion there. Thank you.